So hi everyone, I'm Jasmine Fuller. I'm a fellow with NCASM at Howard University. So I specialize in economics, so it'd really be great to hear all of your feedback about my project. Starting off with my acknowledgements, just thanking all of the people that funded my research and helped me get here. Okay, so to start off, so in this project, I'm investigating the characteristics of vulnerability to severe weather. So looking at, so as you all know, as climate change is going on, events of severe weather are increasing in intensity and also in frequency. And so statements by the EPA have shown that racial and ethnic minority populations will be disproportionately impacted by these increases in events of severe weather. And also in states like Florida, California, Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi are also going to be at higher risk for severe weather. And coincidentally are also where the largest percentage of the Black population in the US is located. So here I have a map of the percentage of the US Black population in these different regions of the US. And so as you see in the South, there's about 56% of the Black population lives in that region. And also, like I mentioned, is where Texas, Florida, Mississippi, and all those high vulnerability states are located. And then also some of these yellow areas just highlight other spots that are that have a high percentage of the Black population. And then this graph shows the number of billion-dollar disasters that occurred in each of these regions. So the darker red representing areas that have the largest amount of billion-dollar disasters. And as you can see, most of the darker red areas are also where we saw in the previous graph that have the largest population of Black residents in the US. Okay, and so what do we do about this high vulnerability? How do we decrease the vulnerability to severe weather? So in this project, I propose the aspect of preparedness. So doing steps before the occurrence of a severe weather event in order to reduce the impacts of the severe weather. So it's defined as knowing the risk to your particular community where you live, and then creating an emergency plan, having emergency supplies, knowing where to go in case of evacuation, and all those different aspects are what define preparedness. And so we can separate preparedness into two different types of actions. So we have resource-based measures of preparedness, which have to do with you actually going out and using resources or funds in order to get these measures of preparedness. So obtaining renters or homeowners insurance, obtaining flood insurance, having money set aside for emergency, and in other cases, having, storm doors or windows installed in your homes. And then action-based measures would be less reliant on the funds that you have. So those would be seeking out any disaster information, developing emergency plan, signing up for real-time alerts in your communities. And so I separate these two types of measures because they both act to prepare you for an event of severe weather. But like I said before, the resource-based measures, there are some barriers to enacting those because of the cost that comes with them. And then there's also barriers to the action-based measures, and in terms of, language barriers, cultural barriers, things like that. So like I mentioned, there are barriers to severe weather preparedness. So although this can help decrease the vulnerability to severe weather, there are many communities, especially minority and racial minority populations, that don't necessarily have access to these preparedness actions because of the barriers I mentioned before. and also other minority groups, including or at-risk groups, including like disabled folks, folks that don't own their homes, things like that. Like I mentioned before, the language as well. So all of those can be barriers to these preparedness actions. So my research question is to investigate the factors that influence the preparedness decisions, focusing on disparities between non-Hispanic Blacks and whites. So although I want to explore the entire realm of what prevents people from preparing for severe weather, I do want to focus on this racial aspect. So the data that I use for this research is the FEMA National Household Survey. So it's a 100+ question survey, and it's administered yearly to a random sample of adults in the US. So the sample is about 5,000 each year. And then it reports on American public disaster preparedness actions, their attitudes and motivations. So not only does it ask them if they are prepared, it also inquires about why they're prepared, why they're not prepared, and also if they think that preparedness even helps. And then the one shortfall of this survey is that it's a telephone interview, so it's kind of restricted. And then also the sample isn't nationally representative. The survey has is a higher income and higher educated sample than the US. And then also limitations to this study in general is that there are different preparedness actions that are better for certain types of severe weather, and that's not necessarily accounted for as of yet. And so here I have this table of summary statistics that shows the different characteristics that I'm using to measure severe weather preparedness. So as I mentioned before, it's not shown here, but I have an aspect of race, whether or not the homeowner has a disability, whether or not this respondent is a homeowner, whether they've experienced severe weather in the past, their age, whether they speak English in their home, their education level, and then also the region that they live in. And that attempts to kind of capture some aspect of the different types of preparedness actions that would help with the different types of severe weather events. So my method and design, so I create a logistic regression model. So where I have the dependent variable is the particular preparedness action, and then the demographic variables would be my independent variables. And so here I have an example. So if having supplies for 3 days, the respondent would answer yes or no. And then the independent variables would be, whether or not their race, whether or not they were a homeowner, they spoke English at home, and all of those other things that I mentioned before. And so here I have the regression results. So I can just kind of go through and I guess explain kind of what each one is saying. So here, and I'm just going to highlight some things. I don't know if I have time to go through everything, but basically here, so these are the different resource-based preparedness actions. So we have having emergency supplies, having an emergency kit at home. So supplies means like food and water for, I think, 3 or more days, having an emergency kit, having evacuation funds set aside, having a vehicle available to you for if in an event of evacuation, and then also having flood insurance. And so this shows that Black respondents were less likely to have a lot of these resource-based preparedness measures compared to white respondents. And then also, but actually the Hispanic, Black, and Asian respondents were all more likely to actually have flood insurance than white respondents. And that was kind of an interesting aspect there. And then also it's showing that those that speak English at home are more likely to have an evacuation vehicle compared to Spanish-speaking respondents. And then also homeowners are more likely to have these resource-based preparedness measures. And then hopefully finally, I think, so lower income and middle income respondents are less likely to have a lot of these resource-based preparedness measures. And then also respondents that have less than college are less likely to have a lot of these other resource-based preparedness measures. And so basically the theme here is just showing that a lot of these aspects that relate to having lower income, being part of a minority group, make you less likely to have these resource-based preparedness measures. And then also householders with disabilities are less likely to have some of these evacuation funds and some of these other measures. And then same with the regions. So this is comparing to the West. A lot of these are less likely to have supplies and different things like that. The Midwest is more likely to have supplies, probably because in a tornado you're staying indoors. So that kind of captures a little bit of that. And then here, okay, sorry. And then I'm almost done. And then basically here, just to point out that whether or not preparation, the respondents' answers whether or not they believe that preparation helps, that is not significant in the resource-based, in them deciding to perform a resource-based preparedness measure. And then now if we go to the action-based preparedness, so a lot of our results are insignificant when it comes to race, but I just want to point out that whether they answered does preparation help is actually significant here and makes them more likely to perform a lot of these action-based preparedness measures. And so I'll just go to the end, the summary. So basically, whoa. Oh no, okay, well, basically this to summarize, it just kind of shows that, these people want to prepare, but there are other aspects like low income access and things like that that are keeping them from making these preparation actions, which makes them even more vulnerable to severe weather than they already are. And so the end of it is just that I want to complete this project in order to encourage more funding and more support to these communities that are at risk.
We can take one question. Yes.
So, in your opinion, what do you think can be done on like the local, state, or federal levels to increase the preparedness in these communities?
So I think that a lot of funding is focused for recovery and not necessarily before a severe weather event happens. So I think that if we can identify these communities, because there are other studies that are similar to mine using different data sets that show have almost the exact same results. So it's very clear that these communities are the ones that are at risk. And I think if we can focus more education about severe weather preparedness, if we can focus more funding, help these people give them an evacuation fund, give them an evacuation vehicle access, things like that, then that could really make a big difference.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.